The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in February 1882, and Eleanor Vaughn knew before she even opened it that her life was about to change forever, though she could not have imagined just how much. She sat at the small wooden table in the cramped Boston boarding house room she shared with two other women, her fingers trembling as she broke the wax seal. The advertisement had seemed almost too good to be true when she had spotted it 3 weeks earlier in the newspaper. Respectable woman needed for Western household. Room, board, and wages provided. Apply to Mr. Isaac Anderson, Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory. Eleanor had written immediately, her hand cramped from hours spent composing and recomposing the letter until it seemed perfect. At 20 years old, she had already spent 6 years working in the textile mills, her lungs growing weaker each winter from the lint-filled air. The promise of fresh Western air and honest work had seemed like a gift from heaven itself. Now, holding the response in her hands, she read the words that would haunt her for months to come. The letter was not from Mr. Isaac Anderson himself, but from a Mrs. Harriet McGill, who identified herself as his housekeeper and the manager of his ranch household. Miss Vaughn, the letter read in tight, precise handwriting, your application has been accepted. A train ticket will be sent under separate cover. You will arrive in Kingfisher by the first week of March. Your duties will include cooking, cleaning, laundry, and any other tasks required of you. You will receive room and board. Your quarters will be separate from the main house. You are expected to be modest, obedient, and hardworking at all times. Do not expect to dine with the family or to be treated as anything other than what you are. Help. Mr. Anderson is a bachelor and a respected rancher. Your reputation and his depend on you knowing your place. Eleanor's heart sank as she read the words again. Room and board, but no mention of wages, no mention of anything beyond servitude. She thought of the advertisement again, trying to remember the exact wording. Had it truly promised wages, or had her desperate hope filled in details that were never there? Still, what choice did she have? The mill would kill her eventually. She had watched it happen to her own mother just 2 years earlier, coughing up blood until her lungs finally gave out entirely. At least in Oklahoma Territory, she would breathe clean air. At least she would see the sky. The train ticket arrived the next day, and Eleanor spent the following week packing her few belongings and saying goodbye to the women she had lived and worked beside. None of them seemed surprised that she was leaving. They all understood the calculation that had to be made when survival itself was at stake. The journey west took 5 days, the train rattling through landscapes that grew progressively wilder and more beautiful. Eleanor pressed her face to the window, watching forests give way to plains, watching cities thin out into small towns and then into nothing but endless grass and sky. She had never seen so much space in her entire life. By the time the train finally pulled into the small station at Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, Eleanor felt as though she had traveled not just across a continent, but into an entirely different world. The town itself was hardly more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street. Everything was covered in a fine layer of red dust, and the wind that blew across the plains was strong enough to make her stumble as she stepped down onto the platform. A stern-looking woman in her 50s was waiting there, her gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. She looked Eleanor up and down with an expression that managed to convey both satisfaction and disapproval. "Miss Vaughn, I presume," the woman said. It was not really a question. "I am Mrs. McGill. You will address me as such at all times. Come along. The wagon is waiting." Eleanor followed, carrying her single battered trunk. Mrs. McGill did not offer to help, and Eleanor did not expect her to. The wagon was driven by a young man who could not have been more than 16, with sandy hair and a nervous demeanor. He loaded Eleanor's trunk without meeting her eyes. The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour, following a rutted road that stretched out across the grassland. Mrs. McGill spent most of the journey outlining Eleanor's duties in exhaustive detail. She would rise at 4:30 each morning to start the fires and begin breakfast. She would clean, cook, do laundry, mend clothes, tend the vegetable garden, preserve food, and do whatever else was required. She would have Sunday afternoons to herself, but only after the midday meal was served and cleaned up. She would not speak unless spoken to when Mr. Anderson was present. She would not, under any circumstances, presume to think of herself as anything other than a servant. Mr. Anderson may be a bachelor, but he comes from good family back in Texas, Mrs. McGill said, her voice sharp. His father sent me along when Isaac decided to establish his own ranch out here in the territory. I have kept his household running smoothly for 3 years now, and I will not have some Eastern girl getting ideas above her station. Eleanor wanted to ask what ideas Mrs. McGill thought she might get, but she bit her tongue. She needed this position, even if it was not what she had hoped for. The ranch, when it finally came into view, was more substantial than Eleanor had expected. The main house was a 2-story structure of white painted wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. There were several outbuildings, a large barn, a stable, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and a smaller structure that Mrs. McGill identified as the cookhouse and Eleanor's quarters. "You will sleep above the cookhouse," Mrs. McGill said as the wagon rolled to a stop. "Your room is small but adequate. You will take your meals there as well, after the family has been served. I trust you understand that you are not to use the main house except when performing your duties." Eleanor nodded, swallowing her disappointment. She had not expected to be treated as family, but somehow the reality of her situation was harder than she had anticipated. The young man helped her carry her trunk up the narrow stairs to the small room above the cookhouse. It was indeed small, with barely enough space for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. But the window looked out over the endless prairie, and when Eleanor opened it, clean, fresh air poured in, untainted by smoke or cotton lint. She breathed deeply, feeling something loosen in her chest. "Miss Vaughn," Mrs. McGill's voice cut through her moment of peace. "Come down immediately. Mr. Anderson has returned and you will be presented to him." Eleanor smoothed down her traveling dress, suddenly conscious of how rumpled and dusty she must look after 5 days on the train and an hour on the wagon. She descended the stairs quickly and followed Mrs. McGill across the yard to the main house. The man standing on the porch was not at all what Eleanor had expected. For some reason, she had imagined someone older, someone stern and remote like Mrs. McGill herself. Instead, Isaac Anderson appeared to be in his late 20s, tall and lean with dark hair that was slightly too long and brown eyes that held both intelligence and something that might have been humor. He was dusty from riding, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and he held his hat in his hands as he watched them approach. "Mr. Anderson, this is Eleanor Vaughn, the new girl from Boston," Mrs. McGill said. The way she said "girl" made Eleanor stiffen. Isaac Anderson's eyes met Eleanor's, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. He stepped forward, extending his hand. "Miss Vaughn, welcome to Oklahoma Territory. I hope your journey was not too difficult." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm but not crushing, his palm calloused from work. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. The journey was long but uneventful. I am glad to hear it." He released her hand and glanced at Mrs. McGill. I trust you have shown Miss Vaughn to her quarters. Of course, Mr. Anderson, Mrs. McGill's tone was crisp. I have also outlined her duties. She will begin work tomorrow morning. Actually, Isaac said, his eyes returning to Eleanor, I think Miss Vaughn should take tomorrow to recover from her journey. The day after will be soon enough to begin. Mrs. McGill's expression tightened. Mr. Anderson, I hardly think. That is my decision, Mrs. McGill. There was steel beneath the courtesy in Isaac's voice. Miss Vaughn has traveled a long way. She deserves a day to rest and orient herself. Of course, Mr. Anderson, Mrs. McGill's lips pressed into a thin line. As you say. Eleanor found herself looking at Isaac Anderson with new curiosity. He turned back to her with what might have been an apologetic smile. Welcome to the ranch, Miss Vaughn. I hope you will be happy here. Before Eleanor could respond, Mrs. McGill had her by the arm and was steering her back toward the cookhouse. You may have tomorrow off, but do not think that means you can spend your time idling about, the older woman said sharply. You should use the time to familiarize yourself with the kitchen and supplies. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. Mr. Anderson expects his meals to be substantial and on time. That night, lying in her narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the prairie, Eleanor tried to sort through her confused emotions. The position was worse than she had hoped, but better than the mill. Mrs. McGill was clearly determined to keep her in her place, whatever that place was supposed to be. But Isaac Anderson had been kind, had defended her, had looked at her as though she were a person rather than just a servant. She told herself not to read too much into it. He was her employer, nothing more. And yet, as she finally drifted off to sleep, it was his face she saw, his eyes that had met hers with what seemed like genuine interest. The next day, Eleanor spent the morning exploring the cookhouse and taking inventory of the supplies. The kitchen was well equipped with a large iron stove, good pots and pans, and a pantry stocked with flour, sugar, salt, coffee, and various preserved goods. There was a smokehouse with bacon and ham, and Mrs. McGill had informed her that fresh milk, butter, and eggs were delivered daily from the dairy shed. In the afternoon, Eleanor decided to walk out a little ways from the ranch buildings, wanting to experience the prairie up close. The grass was taller than she had realized, coming almost to her waist in places, and it rippled in the wind like waves on an ocean. The sky seemed impossibly vast, a dome of blue that stretched from horizon to horizon without interruption. She had not gone far when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw Isaac Anderson riding toward her on a tall bay horse. He slowed as he approached, then dismounted with easy grace. "Miss Vaughn," he said, leading his horse by the reins, "I hope you are finding everything satisfactory." "Yes, thank you," Eleanor said, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how far from the ranch buildings. She reminded herself that he was her employer and that Mrs. McGill had warned her about propriety. Isaac seemed to sense her discomfort. He stopped several feet away, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to apologize for Mrs. McGill," he said. "She can be rather overbearing." Eleanor was surprised into honesty. "She told me on the ride from town that I was not to get ideas above my station." Isaac's expression darkened. Did she now? It was not a question. He was silent for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Miss Vaughn, may I be frank with you?" "Of course, Mr. Anderson. When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for someone to help manage the household, yes. But I never intended to hire a servant in the sense that Mrs. McGill seems to understand the term." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "My father sent Mrs. McGill out here 3 years ago when I first established the ranch. She had been with our family in Texas for years, and I think he believed I needed someone to ensure I maintained proper standards. But her ideas of what is proper are sometimes rather rigid. I see, Eleanor said, though she was not entirely sure she did. What I mean to say is this. I need help running the household, and I am prepared to pay fairly for that help. But I do not believe that someone who works for me is somehow less than me as a person. We all have our roles to play in making a ranch like this function, and every role is important. He met her eyes directly. You will be treated with respect in this household, Miss Vaughn. I give you my word on that. Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. That means a great deal to me. He smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Please, call me Isaac when we are speaking privately. Mr. Anderson makes me feel like I am my father. Then you must call me Eleanor, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Eleanor, he repeated, as though testing how the name sounded. It suits you. They walked back to the ranch together, Isaac leading his horse and Eleanor beside him. He told her about the ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he was building up, about his hopes of eventually supplying beef to the towns springing up across Oklahoma territory. He talked about the land itself, about how different it was from Texas, about the challenges of drought and harsh winters and the constant threat of prairie fires. Eleanor found herself telling him about Boston, about the mills, about her mother's death and her determination to find a better life. She had not intended to share so much, but something about Isaac's quiet attention made the words flow easily. He did not interrupt or offer empty platitudes. He simply listened, and Eleanor realized that it had been a very long time since anyone had truly listened to her. When they reached the ranch yard, Mrs. McGill was waiting on the porch of the main house, her arms crossed and her expression thunderous. Isaac's jaw tightened when he saw her. Mrs. McGill, he said evenly, is something wrong? I was simply wondering where you had gone off to, Mr. Anderson, she said. It is getting late, and I had thought you would want your supper. I will be in shortly, Isaac said. I was just showing Miss Vaughn some of the property. Mrs. McGill's eyes flicked to Eleanor, cold and assessing. I see. Well, I hope Miss Vaughn understands that she has work to begin the day after tomorrow. She should not overtire herself with long walks. I will see to my own affairs, Mrs. McGill, Isaac said, his voice hardening. And Miss Vaughn's work schedule as well. Is that understood? A dull flush rose in Mrs. McGill's cheeks. Of course, Mr. Anderson. Isaac turned to Eleanor with an apologetic look. I hope you have a pleasant evening, Eleanor. If you need anything, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you, Isaac, Eleanor said, acutely aware of Mrs. McGill's sharp intake of breath at the use of his first name. That night, lying in her bed, Eleanor could not stop thinking about the afternoon, about the way Isaac had spoken to her, as though her thoughts and experiences mattered, about the way he had defended her to Mrs. McGill. She told herself not to be foolish, not to read more into his kindness than was there. But her heart felt lighter than it had in years. The next morning, Eleanor began her duties in earnest. She rose at 4:30, dressed quickly in the cold pre-dawn darkness, and made her way down to the cookhouse kitchen. She had the fires going and coffee brewing by the time Mrs. McGill appeared at 5. I will watch you prepare breakfast this morning, the older woman announced. I need to ensure you know what you are doing. Eleanor bit back a sharp response. She had been cooking since she was 10 years old, had fed herself and her mother on a mill worker's wages for years. She knew her way around a kitchen. But she said nothing, simply set about preparing eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy. Mrs. McGill watched with a critical eye, occasionally making sharp comments about the way Eleanor cut the butter into the flour or the temperature of the griddle. Eleanor ignored her as much as possible, focusing on the work itself. When the food was ready, Mrs. McGill carried it to the main house dining room while Eleanor cleaned up the kitchen. She was elbow-deep in soapy water when she heard voices outside. Through the window, she could see Isaac standing in the yard with Mrs. McGill. His expression was stormy. "I do not care what you think is proper, Mrs. McGill," he was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. "Miss Vaughn will eat her meals at the dining table with me, not alone in the cookhouse like some kind of scullery maid." "Mr. Anderson, really? What would people think? A young, unmarried woman dining alone with a bachelor. Her reputation will be fine," Isaac interrupted. "You will be present after all, and in case you have forgotten, Mrs. McGill, I make the decisions about how this household is run." "Your father would be appalled," Mrs. McGill said stiffly. "My father is in Texas and I am in Oklahoma," Isaac replied. "This is my ranch and these are my rules. From now on, Miss Vaughn will take her meals in the dining room. Is that clear?" Mrs. McGill's response was too quiet for Eleanor to hear, but her ramrod-straight posture as she stalked back toward the house suggested she was furious. A few minutes later, Isaac himself appeared at the cookhouse door. "Eleanor, may I come in?" "Of course," Eleanor said, drying her hands on her apron. Her heart was beating faster than it should. Isaac stepped inside, ducking his head slightly to clear the door frame. In the small space, he seemed even taller than before. "I have just informed Mrs. McGill that you will be taking your meals in the house from now on. I hope that is acceptable to you." "Isaac, you do not have to, I want to," he said firmly. "I meant what I said yesterday, Eleanor. You are not a servant. You are an employee and you will be treated accordingly. Besides," and here a hint of humor crept into his voice, "if I have to eat every meal listening to Mrs. McGill lecture me about proper decorum, I may lose my mind entirely. I could use some pleasant company." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very kind of you." "It is not kindness," Isaac said. "It is simple fairness. Now, I believe breakfast is getting cold. Shall we?" The meal was awkward at first, with Mrs. McGill sitting in stony silence and Eleanor acutely conscious of every movement she made. But Isaac seemed determined to put her at ease. He asked her questions about what she thought of Oklahoma territory so far, told her amusing stories about some of the mishaps that had occurred during his first year on the ranch, and generally acted as though dining with his housekeeper was the most natural thing in the world. Despite Mrs. McGill's disapproving presence, Eleanor found herself relaxing. Isaac had a dry wit that surprised her, and he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. When she mentioned that she had noticed a shelf of books in the cookhouse, he immediately offered to lend her any volumes from his own library. "Do you enjoy reading?" he asked. "Very much," Eleanor admitted. "Though I have had little time for it these past few years. The mill did not leave much energy for anything but sleep." Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, something that might have been anger or sadness. "You will have time here," he said. "I insist on it. Mrs. McGill may have told you that you have only Sunday afternoons off, but I am changing that. You will have Sunday afternoons and 2 evenings a week to yourself, to do with as you please." "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. McGill began, her voice sharp. "That is my final word on the matter," Isaac said without looking at her. The days began to settle into a rhythm. Eleanor rose early each morning to prepare breakfast, then spent her days cooking, cleaning, and managing the household. The work was hard, but it was different from the soul-crushing monotony of the mill. There was variety to it, creativity in planning meals and managing supplies. And there was the land itself, the vast prairie that stretched out in all directions, beautiful and wild and free. Isaac was often gone during the day, out riding the range with his small crew of ranch hands. But he made a point of taking his meals at regular times, and Eleanor found herself looking forward to those hours spent around the dining table. Mrs. McGill's disapproval had not lessened, but Eleanor was learning to ignore it. Isaac more than made up for the older woman's coldness with his own warmth and humor. They talked about everything during those meals. Isaac was well educated, had attended university back east before deciding to make his fortune in the cattle business. He loved books and ideas, and he seemed starved for intelligent conversation. Eleanor, who had left school at 14 to work in the mills, had been afraid she would not be able to keep up, but she discovered that she had ideas and opinions of her own, and Isaac valued them. "You are wasted as a housekeeper," he told her one evening 2 weeks after her arrival. Mrs. McGill had excused herself early, pleading a headache, and Isaac had asked Eleanor to stay and have coffee with him. "You have a quick mind and a strong spirit. You should be teaching, or writing, or doing something that challenges you intellectually." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, warming her hands on the coffee cup. "But those opportunities are not available to women like me. I did what I had to do to survive." "I understand that," Isaac said, "but it is not right. It is not fair that someone's worth is determined by their birth or their circumstances rather than their abilities." "Is that why you came out here?" Eleanor asked. "To the territory, to get away from those kinds of judgments." Isaac was quiet for a moment, turning his own cup between his hands. "Partly," he admitted. "My father has very fixed ideas about how things should be done, about the proper order of society. I wanted to build something of my own, something based on different principles. Out here, a person can make themselves into whatever they want to be. At least, that is the hope." "And have you," Eleanor asked softly, "made yourself into what you want to be?" He looked up at her then, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I am working on it," he said, "but I think it is easier to build something new when you have someone who shares your vision." Eleanor did not know what to say to that. She only knew that something was happening between them, something that went beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship even. She could feel it in the air, electric and inevitable, like lightning before a storm. Isaac seemed to realize he had said too much. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "It is getting late. I should let you rest. Thank you for the conversation, Eleanor. I always enjoy talking with you." "As do I," Eleanor said, rising as well. "Good night, Isaac." She lay awake for a long time that night, thinking about his words, about shared visions and building something new, about the way he looked at her, as though she mattered in ways that went beyond her ability to cook his meals and clean his house. The next morning, Mrs. McGill was waiting for Eleanor when she came down to the cookhouse. The older woman's face was set in grim lines. "I think it is time we had a frank conversation, Miss Vaughn," she said. Eleanor's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice level. "About what, Mrs. McGill?" "About Mr. Anderson," Mrs. McGill said bluntly. "I see the way you look at him. I see the way he looks at you, and I am telling you right now that nothing can come of it. Mr. Anderson is a gentleman from a good Texas family. His father has expectations for him, plans for a suitable marriage to a woman of proper breeding. You are a mill girl from Boston with no family, no connections, no prospects. You are here to work, nothing more." Eleanor felt as though she had been slapped. Every word was a knife, sharp because it was true. She had been foolish to let herself imagine anything else. "I understand my position, Mrs. McGill," she said, her voice tight. "Do you?" Mrs. McGill stepped closer, her eyes hard. "Because I do not think you do. Men like Mr. Anderson may dally with women like you, but they do not marry them. If you allow yourself to be used in that way, You will find yourself ruined and cast out with no one to blame but yourself. I have seen it happen before. I will not see it happen here." "I have no intention of being used by anyone," Eleanor said, anger finally breaking through. "And I resent the implication that I would." "Then see that you remember your place," Mrs. McGill said coldly. "You are here to work, nothing more." The conversation haunted Eleanor throughout the day. She tried to tell herself that Mrs. McGill was simply a bitter old woman, jealous of any warmth or affection that did not revolve around her. But the cruel words had found their mark. Eleanor was a mill girl. She had no family, no prospects, no future beyond what she could build with her own two hands. What could someone like Isaac Anderson possibly see in her beyond a passing fancy? That evening when Isaac came in for supper, Eleanor was subdued. She answered his questions politely but did not volunteer conversation. She could feel his puzzled glances, but she did not look up from her plate. After the meal, when Mrs. McGill had gone to her room, Isaac caught Eleanor's arm gently as she was about to leave. "Eleanor, is something wrong? Have I done something to upset you?" "No," Eleanor said, still not meeting his eyes. "I am simply tired." "Eleanor, please look at me." His voice was gentle, worried. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "What happened? You have been different all evening." Eleanor hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Mrs. McGill spoke to me this morning. She reminded me of my place. She told me that I should not get ideas above my station." Isaac's expression darkened. "She had no right, she had every right," Eleanor interrupted. "She is trying to protect you, and she is not wrong. I am a mill girl from Boston. You are a rancher from a good Texas family. Those are the facts." "Those are circumstances," Isaac said fiercely. "They are not facts about who you are as a person." "Eleanor, I have known women from so-called good families who had nothing in their heads but gossip and vanity. And I have known you for barely 3 weeks, but in that time you have shown more intelligence, more strength, more genuine worth than all of them combined." "Isaac, no, let me finish." He still held her arm, his grip gentle but insistent. "I do not care where you came from or what work you did before you came here. I care about who you are now, and who you are is remarkable." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "You cannot mean that." "I do mean it." He released her arm, but only so he could take both her hands in his. "Eleanor, I know this is fast. I know it is unexpected, but I have to be honest with you. These past few weeks, getting to know you, talking with you, seeing your mind work, your spirit, your kindness, it has made me realize something. I care about you, deeply. And I hope that perhaps you care about me too." Eleanor's heart was racing. Every warning Mrs. McGill had given her, every lesson she had learned about knowing her place told her to pull away, but she could not, she did not want to. "I do care about you," she whispered. "But Isaac, Mrs. McGill is right about one thing. What can come of this? You need someone suitable, someone who can help you build your ranch and your reputation, someone your family will approve of." "What I need," Isaac said, his eyes intense on hers, "is someone who understands what I am trying to build here, someone who shares my values, someone who sees me as a person, not just as a name or a fortune or a business prospect. Eleanor, you are that person. You are the first person I have met in a very long time who truly sees me." "And you see me," Eleanor said, the truth of it overwhelming. All her life she had been invisible, just another pair of hands to work the machines, another mouth to feed. But Isaac saw her, really saw her. "I do," Isaac said softly, "and what I see is extraordinary." He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Eleanor did not pull away. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning, she kissed him back with all the pent-up longing she had been trying to deny. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I know this is complicated," he said. "I know there will be obstacles. But Eleanor, I need you to know something. You are not a servant to me. You never were, and you never will be. If you will have me, if you will stay here with me, it will be as my equal. Always." Eleanor felt tears spill over, running down her cheeks. "Do you mean that?" "With all my heart," Isaac said. "You are my equal, Eleanor, in every way that matters." She kissed him again, pouring into it all the emotion she could not yet put into words. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling through her tears. "I will stay," she said. "I will stay with you." The joy on Isaac's face was brilliant. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Eleanor felt safer and more valued than she ever had in her life. Of course, Mrs. McGill was not pleased. When she learned what had transpired, she confronted Isaac directly, threatening to write to his father to spread gossip, to make life difficult for Eleanor. Isaac listened patiently, then informed her that she was welcome to return to Texas if she found the situation so distasteful. Otherwise, she would treat Eleanor with respect, or she would find herself looking for a new position. Mrs. McGill chose to stay, but her hostility toward Eleanor intensified. She made snide comments, found fault with everything Eleanor did, and generally made her presence as unpleasant as possible. Eleanor tried to ignore it, but the constant barbs wore on her. It was Isaac who finally put an end to it. One morning at breakfast, after Mrs. McGill had made a particularly cutting remark about Eleanor's cooking, he set down his fork with deliberate care. "Mrs. McGill," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "You have been with my family for many years, and I have respected that service, but I will not tolerate you speaking to Eleanor in that manner." "Mr. Anderson, I was simply—" "You were being cruel," Isaac interrupted. "And it stops now. Eleanor is not just the housekeeper. She is going to be my wife." Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes wide. They had not discussed marriage explicitly, though it had been understood, implied in their conversations and kisses over the past weeks. But to hear Isaac say it so boldly, to claim her so publicly, made it real in a way it had not been before. Mrs. McGill's face went white, then red. "Your wife? Mr. Anderson, have you lost your senses? She is nobody. She has no family, no connections, nothing to bring to such a union." "She brings herself," Isaac said, reaching across the table to take Eleanor's hand. "And that is everything I need. Mrs. McGill, you have a choice. You can accept this with grace, or you can pack your bags, but I will not have Eleanor treated with anything less than the respect she deserves." Mrs. McGill looked between them, her mouth opening and closing. Finally, she drew herself up with as much dignity as she could muster. "Very well, Mr. Anderson. I can see that my services are no longer required here. I will make arrangements to return to Texas immediately." "As you wish," Isaac said. "I will provide a generous severance and arrange for your travel." Mrs. McGill swept out of the room, her back rigid with outrage. The moment the door closed behind her, Eleanor turned to Isaac with a mixture of shock and exhilaration. "Did you mean it?" she asked. "About marriage?" Isaac brought her hand to his lips. "Every word. Eleanor Vaughn, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, Isaac, I will." They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Kingfisher. It was a quiet ceremony, attended by the ranch hands and a few townspeople who had become friendly with Isaac over his 3 years in the territory. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that Isaac had insisted on buying for her in Oklahoma City, and she carried wildflowers gathered from the prairie. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, Eleanor held her breath, half expecting some dramatic interruption. But there was only supportive silence, and then Isaac was kissing her, and she was his wife. The ranch hands had prepared a celebration back at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food and drink aplenty. Eleanor found herself laughing and dancing, Isaac's arm around her waist, feeling freer and happier than she ever had in her life. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked as they stood together watching the sun set over the prairie, the party winding down around them. "I am thinking that 6 months ago, I was working in a mill in Boston, believing that was all my life would ever be," Eleanor said. "And now I am here, married to you. Looking out at this beautiful land, it feels like a dream." "It is real," Isaac said, pulling her closer. "You are real. This is real, and it is only the beginning, Eleanor. We are going to build something extraordinary together." And they did, with Mrs. McGill gone. Eleanor took over full management of the household, and she discovered she had a talent for it. She reorganized the cookhouse, planted an expanded vegetable garden, and began preserving food for the winter with an efficiency that impressed even the ranch hands. But she also did more than that. She began keeping the ranch books, having a head for figures that Isaac gratefully took advantage of. She learned about cattle and horses, about reading the land and the weather. She rode out with Isaac, learning to sit a horse properly, and she began to understand the rhythm and flow of ranch life. Isaac made good on his promise. He treated her as his equal in every decision about the ranch. He asked her opinion and genuinely listened to her answers. When she suggested they could make extra money by selling vegetables and preserved goods to the growing town of Kingfisher, he helped her set up a weekly trip to sell their wares. When she proposed hiring a young woman from town who needed work, he agreed immediately. The young woman, named Sarah, was a widow with a small child. She needed income desperately, and Eleanor knew what it was like to be desperate for work. Sarah proved to be hardworking and grateful, and Eleanor trained her in cooking and household management. More than that, she became Eleanor's friend, another woman to talk to in a world that could be lonely despite Isaac's love. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of work and joy. The ranch prospered, the cattle herd grew, and Isaac's reputation as a fair dealer and honest businessman spread throughout the territory. Eleanor's vegetable and preserves business became so successful that she was able to hire Sarah full-time, and together they managed the household and the growing side business. But it was not all easy. There were challenges and setbacks. A drought in the summer of 1883 killed part of the herd and withered the vegetable garden. Eleanor and Sarah worked desperately to save what they could, hauling water from the creek until their backs ached and their hands blistered. Isaac and the ranch hands struggled to keep the remaining cattle alive, driving them to distant water sources and watching helplessly as the prairie grass turned brown and brittle. The financial strain was enormous. Eleanor watched Isaac grow thin and worried, saw the lines deepen around his eyes. One night, lying in bed beside him, she felt him staring at the ceiling, clearly unable to sleep. "Tell me what you are thinking," she said softly. Isaac was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I am thinking that I may have to sell part of the herd at a loss just to keep the ranch going through the winter. I am thinking that I brought you out here promising you a good life, and instead I have given you endless work and worry." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Isaac Anderson, you listened to me. You brought me out here and gave me freedom. You gave me respect. You gave me love and partnership. I was dying slowly in that mill in Boston. Here I am alive. Do you understand? I am alive. Whatever challenges we face them together, and that makes all the difference." Isaac's hand came up to cup her cheek. "How did I get so lucky?" he whispered. "We both got lucky," Eleanor said and kissed him. They survived the drought. They sold some of the herd, as Isaac had feared they would have to, but they kept enough to rebuild. Eleanor's preserves business brought in enough cash to buy feed and supplies when they needed them. And slowly, painfully, they recovered. The rains returned in the spring of 1884, and with them came hope. The grass grew green again, the cattle fattened, and the garden flourished. By summer, it was clear that they would not only survive but thrive. It was in August of that year that Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had said nothing, wanting to be sure. When she finally told Isaac, sitting together on the porch one evening watching the sun set, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Eleanor, truly." "Truly," she said, smiling at his expression. "In February, the doctor thinks." Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of glass. "I am going to be a father," he said, sounding dazed. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Isaac said. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Eleanor, you have given me everything. A true partnership, love, and now a child. I do not have words for what that means to me." The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. Sarah took over most of the cooking, and Isaac fretted over Eleanor constantly, driving her half mad with his concern. But eventually, the sickness passed, and Eleanor felt stronger than ever. She continued to work, managing the household and the business, though Isaac tried repeatedly to get her to rest more. "I am pregnant, not ill," she told him firmly. "Women have been having babies and continuing to work since the beginning of time. I will not spend 6 months lounging about like an invalid. I just want you to be safe," Isaac said, his hand resting protectively over the growing swell of her belly. "We are safe," Eleanor assured him. "Both of us." In February of 1885, Eleanor went into labor during a snowstorm. The doctor could not make it out from town, and so Isaac sent one of the ranch hands for the midwife while he stayed by Eleanor's side, holding her hand and trying not to panic. The midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Johnson, arrived just in time. She took over with brisk efficiency, shooing Isaac out of the room despite his protests. Sarah stayed with Eleanor, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Eleanor had never known such pain, had never felt her body work so hard. But through it all, she held onto one thought: soon she would hold her child. Soon she and Isaac would be a family. When the baby finally came just after dawn, it was a boy. Mrs. Johnson cleaned him off and wrapped him in a blanket before placing him in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the little fingers that waved in the air, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "He is perfect," she whispered. Isaac, who had been allowed back into the room, knelt beside the bed with tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Eleanor, he is beautiful. You are amazing." They named him James Isaac Anderson, and he became the center of their world. Isaac proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Eleanor for feeding, walking the floor with James when he fussed, staring at him for hours as though he could not quite believe he was real. "I never knew," Isaac said one night as he rocked a sleeping James in his arms. "I never knew I could love someone this much, first you and now him." Eleanor, exhausted and sore but happier than she had ever been, smiled at the picture they made. "We are a family," she said. "We are," Isaac agreed. "The family I always wanted." The years that followed were full and rich. James grew from a baby to a toddler, curious and energetic, getting into everything. The ranch continued to prosper. Eleanor's business expanded to include not just preserves, but also baked goods and handwork, which she sold in Kingfisher and in some of the other growing towns in the territory. She hired 2 more women, both in situations like Sarah's had been, needing work and a chance. Isaac's father visited once, 2 years after James was born. He arrived unannounced, stepping down from a hired buggy with his wife in tow, clearly expecting to find his son living in squalor with an unsuitable wife. Instead, he found a prosperous ranch, a well-managed household, and Eleanor herself, who met him with quiet dignity and refused to be intimidated. The visit was tense at first. Isaac's father, a tall, stern man named Robert Anderson, made no secret of his disapproval of his son's marriage. But Eleanor had dealt with disapproval before. She served him excellent meals, showed him the books that proved the ranch's profitability, and generally demonstrated that she was far from the fortune-hunting nobody he had assumed. It was James, however, who truly won him over. The little boy, fearless and charming, climbed right into his grandfather's lap one evening and began chattering away about horses and cattle. Robert Anderson's stern expression softened, and by the end of the week-long visit, he was smiling more than Isaac had ever seen him smile. "You have done well for yourself, son," Robert said to Isaac on the last evening of the visit. "The ranch is impressive, and your wife, well, I will admit I had my doubts, but she is clearly capable and intelligent. You could have done much worse." It was not exactly a ringing endorsement, but coming from Robert Anderson, it was high praise. Isaac's mother, a quieter woman who had spent most of the visit watching and listening, was more generous. "Eleanor, my dear," she said as they were preparing to leave, "I want you to know that I think my son is very lucky to have found you. You have made him happy and you have given him a beautiful family. That is all a mother can ask." Eleanor hugged her, feeling tears prick her eyes. She had not realized how much she had needed that acceptance, that validation. "Thank you," she whispered. After Isaac's parents left, life returned to its comfortable rhythm. Eleanor and Isaac continued to build their ranch and their family. 3 years after James was born, Eleanor delivered a daughter they named Rose. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was following her brother and the ranch hands around, demanding to be included in everything. The territory was changing around them. More settlers were arriving, more towns springing up. In 1889, the land run brought a flood of new people, and Oklahoma Territory began to feel less like a frontier and more like a settled place. The ranch prospered along with the territory. Isaac became a respected member of the community, serving on various committees and councils. Eleanor's business had grown so much that she had 5 women working for her, and their goods were sold in 6 different towns. But through all the changes and growth, the core of their relationship remained the same. Isaac still treated Eleanor as his equal, still asked her opinion, still listened to her ideas. They made decisions together, raised their children together, built their life together. One evening, sitting on the porch and watching James and Rose play in the yard, Eleanor leaned against Isaac's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, his arm coming around her. "I am thinking about the day I arrived here," Eleanor said. "How frightened I was. How Mrs. McGill told me I was nothing but a servant. How I believed for a moment that was all I would ever be." "I am sorry you had to go through that," Isaac said, his voice soft. "Do not be sorry," Eleanor said, turning to look up at him. "Because you proved her wrong. You saw me, Isaac. When no one else did, when I could barely see myself, you saw me. And you told me I would be your equal always. You kept that promise. You have kept it every single day." Isaac's eyes were bright with emotion. "You made it easy to keep," he said. Eleanor, you are the strongest, bravest, most capable person I have ever known. You came out here with nothing but hope and determination, and you built a life, a family, a business. I am in awe of you. We built it together, Eleanor corrected. Everything we have, we built together. Together, Isaac agreed and kissed her. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Isaac's father died in 1895, and Isaac made the journey back to Texas for the funeral. He returned with his mother, who decided she would rather spend her remaining years in Oklahoma with her son and his family than alone in Texas. She moved into the ranch house, and to Eleanor's relief, proved to be nothing like Mrs. McGill. She was kind and helpful, doting on James and Rose, and becoming a genuine friend to Eleanor. James grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose was more interested in books and learning, and Eleanor made sure she had every opportunity to develop her mind. When a school was established in Kingfisher, Eleanor insisted both children attend, despite Isaac's worry about Rose making the journey. She is as capable as any boy, Eleanor told him firmly, and she deserves the same chances. In 1899, when James was 14 and Rose was 11, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, as she had thought her childbearing years were behind her. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two. Eleanor was older now, and her body did not bounce back as easily. But she was determined, and in June of 1900 she delivered a healthy baby boy they named Henry. Isaac, holding his youngest son for the first time, looked at Eleanor with so much love it took her breath away. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for this, for our family, for choosing to stay with me all those years ago." "It was the easiest choice I ever made," Eleanor said truthfully. As the new century dawned, the Anderson Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They had over 300 head of cattle, extensive pasture land, and a thriving side business in preserved foods and goods. James was preparing to take over more of the ranch operations, showing a talent for management that made Isaac proud. Rose was excelling in school and talking about becoming a teacher. And little Henry was growing fast, already toddling around and getting into mischief. Eleanor looked back on the journey that had brought her here and marveled at how much her life had changed. She had come to Oklahoma Territory as a desperate young woman with no prospects, expecting nothing but hard work and servitude. Instead, she had found love, partnership, respect, and a family. She had found Isaac, who had seen her worth when no one else did, who had kept his promise to treat her as his equal in all things. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Isaac gave Eleanor a gift. It was a piece of paper, legal and official, showing that he had put the ranch in both their names equally. "I know we are already equal partners," he said, "but I wanted it to be official, legal. This ranch is as much yours as mine. Everything we have built together." Eleanor held the paper, tears streaming down her face. "Isaac, you did not have to do this." "I did," he said firmly, "because I need you to know, and I need the world to know, that you are not just my wife. You are my partner, my equal in every way. Always." "Always," Eleanor repeated and kissed him. Years continued to unfold, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew. James married a kind young woman from Kingfisher named Margaret, and they built a house on the ranch property. Rose went away to school and became a teacher, just as she had planned, working in a school in Oklahoma City. And Henry, as he grew, showed signs of having inherited both his father's love of the land and his mother's head for business. Isaac's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1905, surrounded by family. It was a loss, but a gentle one, and they buried her in the small cemetery outside Kingfisher with gratitude for the years they had been able to share. In 1907, Oklahoma became a state, and Isaac and Eleanor celebrated with a grand party at the ranch. The territory they had helped settle was now part of the Union, officially recognized and respected. It felt like a culmination of everything they had worked toward. Eleanor, watching the celebration from the porch, felt Isaac's arm come around her waist. They were both older now, gray threading through their hair, lines marking their faces. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered years of joy and hardship together. "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked, the question he had asked her 1,000 times over the years. "I am thinking that I am grateful," Eleanor said, "for all of it, the hard times and the good times, for you, for our family, for this life we built together." "You once told me that I gave you freedom," Isaac said. "But Eleanor, you gave me something just as precious. You gave me a true partnership, a real marriage. Not one based on duty or obligation or social expectations, but one based on mutual respect and love. You made me better than I ever could have been alone." "We made each other better," Eleanor said, turning in his arms to face him. "That is what equals do." "Equals," Isaac agreed. "Always." He kissed her, and Eleanor felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt at their first kiss 25 years earlier. Some things, she thought, did not change. Some things only deepened with time. James and Margaret gave them grandchildren, 3 in total. Rose eventually married a professor she met in Oklahoma City, a kind, thoughtful man who shared her love of learning. They had 2 children and visited the ranch often. Henry, as he grew into a young man, showed an interest in expanding the business side of the ranch, in finding new markets and opportunities. Isaac and Eleanor stepped back gradually from the day-to-day operations, passing more and more responsibility to their children. But they never stopped being partners. They still rode out together across the prairie, still sat together on the porch in the evenings, still talked through decisions and ideas. In the summer of 1920, on a warm evening with the sun setting gold and orange over the endless grassland, Eleanor and Isaac sat on the porch of the house they had built together. They were both in their late 50s now, their lives marked by decades of work and love and partnership. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Eleanor asked. "When I first arrived here, terrified and unsure." "I think about it often," Isaac said. "I remember seeing you step down from the wagon, looking so determined despite being clearly exhausted and scared. And I remember thinking that there was something special about you. I did not know what it was yet, but I knew I wanted to find out. Mrs. McGill told me I would be nothing but a servant," Eleanor said, a hint of old anger in her voice. "She told me to know my place." "And I told you that you would be my equal always," Isaac said, taking her hand. "I have spent 38 years keeping that promise, Eleanor, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "As would I," Eleanor said softly. "You saved me, Isaac. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You valued me when I did not even know how to value myself." "We saved each other," Isaac corrected gently. "I was lonely and adrift before you came. You gave me purpose and partnership and love. You gave me everything that truly matters." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. In the distance, they could see their grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Closer by, Henry was talking to one of the ranch hands about plans for the next week. "Everything was as it should be. We did well, did we not?" Eleanor said after a while, "with our life, with our family." "We did better than well," Isaac said. "We built something extraordinary, not because we had money or connections or easy circumstances, but because we believed in each other. Because we were true partners. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady reliability that had been her anchor for nearly 4 decades. "I love you, Isaac Anderson," she said. "And I love you, Eleanor Anderson," he replied. "My equal, always." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace. She had come to Oklahoma territory expecting nothing, hoping for little more than survival. Instead, she had found everything: love, respect, partnership, a family, a life worth living. They had faced challenges and overcome them together. They had built a ranch, raised children, created a legacy. And through it all, Isaac had kept his promise. He had treated her as his equal, not just in word but in deed, every single day. The years that followed were golden ones. James took over full management of the ranch, running it with skill and care. Rose's children came to visit often, bringing energy and laughter. Henry's business expansions proved successful, bringing new prosperity. And Isaac and Eleanor, now truly in their autumn years, spent their time enjoying the life they had built. They traveled a little, visiting Rose in Oklahoma City, taking a trip to see the ocean that Eleanor had always dreamed of. But they always came back to the ranch, to the prairie that stretched out endlessly under the vast sky. It was home in a way nowhere else could ever be. In the fall of 1925, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a huge gathering at the ranch. Friends and family came from all over Oklahoma and beyond. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, testament to the love they had built together. Isaac and Eleanor stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, and looked out at the celebration with quiet joy. 40 years, Isaac said wonderingly. It seems like a lifetime and like no time at all. It has been the best lifetime I could have imagined, Eleanor said. Thank you for every day of it. Thank you for saying yes, Isaac replied. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being my partner, my equal, my love. They danced that night under the stars, moving slowly to music played by a local band. Eleanor felt young again, felt like the scared 20-year-old who had arrived in Oklahoma territory with nothing but hope. But now she had so much more. She had built a life beyond anything she could have dreamed. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management. More grandchildren were born, filling the house with noise and life. Isaac and Eleanor settled into a comfortable routine, still active but no longer bearing the weight of daily operations. They spent their time reading, talking, riding out across the prairie they both loved. Isaac's health began to decline in his 70s, his body wearing down after decades of hard ranch work. But his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Eleanor never wavered. Even when he was confined to bed in his final year, he would reach for her hand, hold it tight, and tell her how grateful he was for every moment they had shared. Eleanor was with him when he died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1932. She held his hand, stroked his hair, and told him over and over that she loved him, that he had given her everything, that she would carry him in her heart always. The grief was overwhelming at first. After 50 years of partnership, of having someone who truly saw her and valued her, the loss was almost unbearable. But Eleanor was strong, as she had always been. She leaned on her children, her grandchildren, her friends. She continued to live at the ranch, in the house she and Isaac had built together. And she remembered. She remembered his promise, made all those years ago, that she would be his equal always. He had kept that promise every single day of their marriage. He had seen her worth when no one else did. He had given her not just love but respect, not just a home but a partnership. Eleanor lived for another 12 years after Isaac's death, watching her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren be born. She remained active in the ranch operations, offering advice and wisdom gained from decades of experience. She never remarried. How could she, when she had already experienced the greatest love of her life? She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1944 at the age of 82. Her children buried her next to Isaac in the small cemetery outside Kingfisher, under the vast Oklahoma sky they had both loved. The headstone reads simply, Eleanor Vaughn Anderson, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, equal partner always. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations. James's children and grandchildren maintained it, keeping alive the principles that Isaac and Eleanor had established. Fair treatment of workers, respect for all people regardless of their background, partnership and equality in marriage and in business. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set gold over the prairie, family members would sit on the porch of the old house and tell stories about Isaac and Eleanor, about how she had come west expecting to be nothing but a servant, and how he had promised she would be his equal always. About how they had built something extraordinary together, not through wealth or privilege, but through genuine partnership and love. The story became a legend in the family, passed down through the years. The tale of the mill girl from Boston and the cowboy who saw her worth. The story of a promise made and kept, of a love that transcended social class and expectation. The story of two people who built a life together as true equals, and in doing so, created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land, still lived in the territory that had become Oklahoma, still told the story of Isaac and Eleanor Anderson. And whenever someone in the family married, whenever a new partnership was formed, they would remember the words that had become a family motto. You will be my equal always. It was a promise worth keeping. It was a love worth remembering. It was a life worth celebrating. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Isaac and Eleanor could have left. Not just a successful ranch or a thriving business, but the example of what true partnership looked like. The proof that when two people truly saw each other, truly respected each other, truly loved each other as equals, they could build something extraordinary. Eleanor had arrived in Oklahoma Territory in 1882 as a frightened young woman with no prospects, expecting nothing but servitude. Instead, she had found love, respect, partnership, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. She had found Isaac, who had kept his promise every single day. And together, they had built not just a ranch but a family, a legacy, and a love story that would endure for generations. She had been told she would be a servant, not a wife. But Isaac had said she would be his equal always, and he had meant it, and that, in the end, made all the difference.